All right. So Tina, I'm so happy to have you here with us today. Welcome so much. There's been a really wonderful response to the idea of having this Q&A and being able to ask questions about having parents be able to ask questions about their kids with ADHD. So Tina lives in Texas, and she specializes in currently working with college kids and adults with ADHD, but her expertise spans the range of ages for kids, and she's going to bring that expertise to us today for whatever our kids' age is. And Tina, if you could just fill in one or two more things to introduce yourself about your background a little bit, and then we can start in on the questions that came in and seemed to be in several categories I think we could focus on.
Well, I provide coaching for college students and professionals who have ADHD and anxiety. Sometimes both, sometimes only one of those. And I have a very much of a developmental perspective. I have a history of doing marriage and family therapy, and I was a certified play therapist at one time, and a whole bunch of other things that kind of lead me to looking at the whole child. So that's my kind of theoretical background, and I'm just so pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me to do this. I've never done a Q&A like this. That's recorded and moderated so well. So this is just a treat to get to do something new. Thank you, Kathy.
Oh, you're really welcome, Tina. It's really fun for me, actually. And there's been a great response. So I want to start in with the first, actually, if I gallery us, no, I don't know. I'm gonna leave the recording as is. It's gonna go back and forth between speakers. Try not to make it flip too quickly. We got some great questions in ahead of time, which I sent you. Mm-hmm. And I thought we would start with, let's start like more at the beginning-ish. There was a question about how do I even know if my kid has ADHD or if it's another issue? And I happen to know who asked this question. So I know her kids come from a background of some trauma, definitely from trauma, and even from being born drug addicted. And they're young, they're 5-ish. And so what is your take on how do we know if it's ADHD or not? And what's your take on how do you relate to it, no matter where it comes from?
Well, I can answer the first part of the question. I think that one of the things I want to encourage people to do is to not get hung up on a diagnosis too much. A diagnosis is primarily intended for the insurance industry and secondarily intended for treatment. Without a diagnosis, the psychologists, the doctors, all the providers can't get paid for the service they provide you. So I don't get hung up a lot on the diagnosis, especially when you've got multiple variables. What I think that you need to pay attention to instead is what's presenting itself. And if executive function weakness is presenting itself, you can have executive function weakness with trauma, you can have it with anxiety, you can have it with stressful days. It all has to do with the continuum of how much you might have. And so if you are on the end of the spectrum of having more executive weakness rather than less, then you qualify for an ADHD diagnosis. And so I don't think it matters as much if they absolutely for certain have ADHD, as much as it matters how much you deal with the symptoms as they present.
Cool. So we'll get into a little bit more, I think, of how to handle certain things as we go through the questions. And at the end, I want to have at least 5 minutes to open up to augmenting the questions after you've given your take on things.
And if I could just add one more thing to that, Kathy, I do think that it's best to if you really need to know, it's best to get a diagnosis with a clinical psychologist. However, I find that a lot of those diagnoses are extremely variable before third grade. So if you have a very young child, sometimes making the financial investment and the time investment of doing a 2-day long neuropsychological evaluation or a neuroeducational evaluation would be better suited if you waited and did it at third grade or a little bit later. Now, if you can't get help at the school without doing it, or if you have other reasons for doing it, that's okay. But I do think that you get the best reading once they're around 8.
That's really helpful. And I think in the younger age, I know in my practice, the focus on co-regulation skills and helping just to understand where behavior is coming from, so we can address the underlying things that are leading to the dysregulation and make environmental changes and make internal changes within our relationship, can address some of the things that present, I think. And that's a really helpful tip. So along that, another specific thing is, we had a question, are there special issues for girls with ADHD versus boys?
Well, girls are they're the silent sufferers in this. Boys get diagnosed very quickly, usually because they're a little more on the hyperactive end. A lot of girls, hyperactivity mostly shows up as sleep problems or things that look like anxiety. And so you can have a insecure girl who's working really, really hard at following all the rules, and she won't get diagnosed until she hits an academic wall. And so the academic walls are generally 3rd, 5th, 7th, 10th grades. So the smarter the kid is, the later they hit that academic wall where they just can't keep up anymore. And so a lot of smart girls will go all the way through elementary, sometimes even junior high, before anybody notices that they're having trouble. And ADHD girls get bullied a lot because of the 3-year maturational delay. People don't know that they, have a maturational delay. They just know they're a little bit off and a little bit annoying. And so it can be really hard for them to be in a friendship group.
So can you put that in a little more concrete terms? Because this is one thing I learned from you that was so important. You talk about a maturational delay. So you have a 12-year-old girl or boy who has ADHD, right?
Mm-hmm.
And their emotional or maturity level is it at least 3 years, around 3 years? What would you say?
So we used to tell people it was 2 to 4 years because we didn't know.
Okay.
But we know now from brain scans, it's literally 3 years.
So there's a 3-year younger maturational age.
Yes, and it's in the area of the social, emotional, and the judgment area of their brains.
Wow, that's really important information, Tina.
Yeah. So I think that if we could just get that information out alone, it could really be transformational in terms of the way parents handle their child. Because when you see the body of a child, especially once they get bigger, you see a 15-year-old body, which sometimes can be as big as yours. It takes a lot of effort and energy and support, hopefully from a partner or somebody else that knows you intimately, that can remind you, 12 years old, 12 years old, 12 years old. Because if you interact with them as a 12-year-old instead of their body age of 15, they're going to feel much more heard. They're going to be more cooperative. And all of the interventions that you do for them are going to fit where they're at developmentally. So
crucial. I know in my practice, I talk a lot about emotional age I've never, until I learned this from you, I've never specifically associated it with ADHD, but definitely with like some kind of potential developmental trauma, or even quiet trauma, or unavoidable things that happened, but something that impacted their emotional regulation skill development. And there's often a gap, so that the emotional age shows up as younger in an older child. And it's so crucial to connect at the level of their emotional age in this way, because that's where that's where actually the true connection lies. The other, you can't connect on a cognitive level when they're emotionally regressed, which can come up in a moment, in a behavioral moments, or can be more overall. It's a huge difference that makes, but it's so challenging to how we see things.
Yes, and if we could try to connect with their biological age instead of their developmental one, they will end up feeling like you don't get them, or it'll always feel like a miss. And then they generally end up blaming themselves for that. Like, there's just something wrong with me. I can't keep up. I can't do what people are asking me to do.
Yeah. Heartbreaking. Well, so there's a couple questions about kids that are, no, wait, let me jump to the emotional question, the social. How do we, nope. Oh, there was one. Oh, yeah. Okay, a 12-year-old middle schooler, rising 7th grader. How can we help manage the social emotional gap so they are not alienated or flagged as the immature weirdo? What can we do to safely support and encourage age-appropriate development and maturity? Right on to what you were just talking about.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's really, I think that it's also a hard one to do. What I recommend is that you try to find friendship groups outside of school too. And like, you could even put your child in a Girl Scout group that might be a little younger than them, or have them be the helper for a younger group, so that they have something. I think that what I've noticed, especially with the girls, the boys are relationally very resilient. You know, somebody can kind of be a little bit mean to them, and they can still go and play ball hard with them and forgive them almost immediately. Girls, you know, I have girls who are in college who can tell me what dress they were wearing in 3rd grade when Susie told her that she was ugly and smelled bad. You know, girls have a tendency to really hold on to things. And so I think that it doesn't have to necessarily be a friendship group at school, as long as it's some kind of friendship group, someplace where they can fall into and know that they're liked and that people are happy to see them. So you might have to orchestrate a little bit of something so that they can be with younger kids in order to do that, because younger kids will love them, you know, because they're older, and it'll be a good fit for them in terms of the way they play and how they play. But I just haven't seen a lot of success in trying to make those things happen in a school environment. And I have seen some complications come from parents who get too involved in trying to make sure they have friends in the school environment.
It's like it sounds like trying to, you can't actually force their developmental age up. Like, so to put on the behaviors that would be appropriate, but it's very dissonant, I would imagine, for them, like not even possible. Like, it's out, and so
that would be
just
like
keep tearing down their self-esteem, I would imagine.
Well, it would be like somebody telling me not to pretend like I have 30 years experience. Just pretend like you're brand new to the field and try to answer some questions.
You can't like make that happen. I love your idea of being helper. And I know this particular question did come from the dad of a boy, and but that's a great idea. So you can actually
And so
have the have the self-confidence building experience,
Yeah.
but it still meets your emotional developmental age in a way that really works.
And one thing that does sometimes work at school is if there is a coach or a teacher, maybe not even a teacher they have that year, but a teacher from their past, that if lunchtime gets uncomfortable or after school time gets uncomfortable, they can go eat lunch with them or something. That can be a godsend for some kids. And most good teachers are A-okay with doing that. So, I mean, I've had some kids who've spent almost an entire year with a teacher at lunchtime. And, you know, in some ways it feels sad, but in another way, it's also very self-protective. I tell people, when your kid keeps telling you they don't want to hang out with somebody, or they keep telling you they don't want to go to a sleepover at somebody's house, don't press it too hard, just trust them. Because they know these kids intimately in a way that we can never understand how mean they might be able to be, or what might be happening behind closed doors.
Yeah, trusting our kids. It's a great point. Also, just lunchroom is also one of the most hugely stressful locations in the school day. So if you've got stress sensitive kids for any reason, that could be ADHD, but it could also be they're introverted. It could be any number of reasons, right? The lunchroom is like the hardest place to be. And
Yes.
so I love that idea of going into another classroom, which gives them what they need. The thing I think that can be confusing is that as parents, we worry that if we sort of address our kid at an emotional age that's younger, we're not going to help them become more mature. Like, we need to try to put them in a we're not trying to hurt them, but like that they need to learn to be in a situation that's challenging or whatever. And actually, it's counterintuitive, but the opposite is true. We need to actually give our child what they need in a brain sense, in an emotional sense, so that it will build in the resilience, that it will become part of their brain architecture, that will allow them the social skills and the ability to be more mature at some point.
Yeah. And one of the analogies I use with people is to think in terms of potty training. You know, if a parent waits for the right signs from the kid that they're about ready to potty train, you can potty train a kid in a week. But if you decide that you're going to be competitive and do it before your neighbor, or you have some kind of idea that they shouldn't still be, you know, not pottying past a certain age, you can work yourself to death and they're not going to potty train. I mean, it's inherently in their body, just like the social, emotional, and judgment issues are inherent to their brain. So if you wait until they're at the right time to do something, like go to college, like drive a car, like date, then they're going to be ready to do it perfectly. It's going to be natural and easy. But if you try to push it before they're ready for it, it's going to be a disaster, and they're going to end up feeling like there's something wrong with them.
Yeah. Well, I just want to acknowledge that Tina and I talked ahead of time for a second, and she did agree to stay an extra few minutes if that worked out. Would that still work for you, Tina?
Yeah, that's fine.
That would be great. So I think around 15 more minutes. There's one category of questions. There's a couple more categories. One is has to do with planners. So I'll just read it. How can I best support a high school student with ADHD? We have a planner for her and she uses it most of the time. She still gets off track often and gets angry when I suggest that she change locations to minimize distractions. Any help is appreciated. She is also ODD. And I just want to also bring in that we've had conversation with one of the dads with a 7th grader coming into 7th grade, 12-year-old, with the planner, and how, you know, the planner would be so helpful, and they're supposed to learn to use the planner. Like, that's their big skill, to go into high school with a planner. capability and
Right.
how hard it is. And you had brought up something like with virtual school, how there isn't even, like, they're trying to find the notes from some virtual amount of overwhelm to put in the planner. Do you have some concrete suggestions? And there's one other question that you might be able to wrap into this. What would you
Kathy,
recommend? What
Kathy,
would
I'm
you
sorry, but
wait?
I can really only do, if I could just do one question instead of trying to wrapping two or three in, are really hard for me.
Oh, no
I,
problem. It's
I
just that this was the
apologize.
planner thing. So,
Mhm.
all right, I'll wait for the next one to follow up on it.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm sorry. It's early here in Austin, and I
No,
only
you don't
had
need
one
to
cup of coffee.
apologize. Sorry. Sorry, I'm like
Um,
overwhelming you.
that's okay. I can set a limit. Um, the the planner is complicated. The planner is essential, and the planner is not going to be accomplished probably until they're around 20, 22, 21, 19 sometimes. 19 between 22, between 19 and 22, I start seeing kids really taking mastery of it. So this is my thing with planners and parents doing the planners with the kids. My daughter, who has ADHD and had a little touch of ODD, would not let me look at or do anything with her stuff after seventh grade. And I had to take my hands off of it. And you may have to take your hands off of it too, because the thing that you want to do is preserve the relationship. If you make a deal over a mandated planner with your kid, then what's happening is you're triangulating with the school and you're becoming the bad guy, and you're not in a position to be able to enjoy your child. If the school is mandating the planner, what you should ask for is an accommodation for them to have a daily coach who, at the end of the day, it literally can be the teacher who's on dismissal. They show their planner to that teacher, and if they don't have anything, the teacher runs them back to the classroom to write it down off all the whiteboards or whatever the system might be that they have. And if your school isn't willing to help your child with the planner, then you will probably save yourself hours and hours of frustration if you can hire a twice a week tutor, once at the beginning of the week and once in about Wednesday night or Thursday, to see that they're still keeping up with what they need to do. The hardest thing to remember about a kid with ADHD and planners is that they are going to fall off the wagon often. And if they are doing it even half the time, count it as a win, give them tons of praise. And when they fall off, say, that's okay. Why don't you just get back on? The thing to remember about a kid and a planner is it, to me, becomes the biggest point of a power struggle between a parent and a child. And so many kids come to me late high school, 12th grade, or college, traumatized by the school and the parent for bludgeoning them with the planner to where they won't even discuss it with me. And I have to build a year of rapport with them before we even talk about planners. So it's important to have the school support them as much as possible because it's a school request, and they should be able to provide you accommodation around that. Yes, it's important for them to do it, but don't get hung up on how they do it. If they do it by putting reminders in their phone, that's something. If they use a homework app, okay. If whatever they need to do to get themselves to do it is really, really important. There's two reasons kids hate planners. One is it's absolutely counterintuitive to the ADHD brain. The ADHD brain loves relevance, it loves novelty, and planners are neither one of those things. The second thing that is a big issue is that it provides such a high level of accountability that it is painful for them because they see how much there is to do, or they don't want their parent to see how much there is to do because they're afraid their parent's going to hold themselves accountable to that. And it just feels like too much. And it can lead to overwhelm very quickly. So the planner is kind of like a whole question and answer session in itself because it's such a hot spot. And just remember to try to stay out of the power struggle with it as much as possible. if they will eventually get to it, but it may take a long time, and it's probably going to be with somebody outside of the parent who teaches them to do it.
Yeah, and I think there is pressure coming from the school mandating the use of the planner. I have a question, can the school appointed coach be added to an IEP? I don't know if that's state dependent. So,
well, a lot of times people don't even know to ask for it.
okay.
So, and one of the things to be clear when you do ask for it, say, I don't expect them to have any special training or anything like that. I just need them to be able to check in with a teacher at the end of the day before they come home that they filled out their planner. And then they're going to probably say to you, well, we'll sign it on every class. But that's very, very embarrassing for the student. It's absolutely humiliating for them to, for the teacher to stop and in front of everybody sign their planner or initial their planner that things have been written into it. So I would ask them to please not do that. I would ask them to have somebody to just literally look at it, see if it's filled in. They don't even have to read the words, and just send them back to rewrite it if they need to.
Some great suggestions. And also one of our dads has hired peer tutor or a peer whatever. So it's like a kid that's only a year or two older, but this dad's child is receptive to that. So it's sort of like implementing that idea of a tutor, but with someone who's
so it's probably a child a year or two older in biology, but look, that's a 5-year span. So that's a great solution. And it's probably a cheap solution. And so I think it's a great idea to do that.
Yeah, and to be sure to share that. I've got a follow-up question from I would love your take on this. I get that we should treat them at their emotional age, but how do we handle the fact that they think of themselves as their biological age? So this person's 11-year-old wants a phone, and then because other 11-year-olds have phones, but she's not ready.
Well, I'm very protective about kids with phones because that's when the real bullying comes into play. It's like kind of bullying 2.0 that happens once phones happen. And I know that by age 11, most kids do have phones. I get that. I understand that. What I would do is I would tell her, I would ask her when would she know that she was more ready, or when would you know she was more ready? And I would start coming up with what some of those things would be. And then I would start working toward those parameters. Like one of the things that I did with my kids, which probably wouldn't fly now because my kids are 23 and 21 now. But I told my kids, until you go to high school, there's absolutely no reason for a phone because I take you everywhere you need to go, and it's just not necessary. And my son especially was the last kid in his class to get a phone. And he tells me now as a 21-year-old that hurt him socially. And it took a lot of assertiveness on his part not to end up getting bullied about not having a phone. So you don't want to go that route either. But what I would do is to think about ways that you could protect her, like maybe give her a phone that doesn't have internet access. Maybe give her a phone, or talk about, I'll know that you're more ready when, this happens, or when you're able to talk to me about this, or whenever, blah, blah, blah. I don't believe in surveillance on kids. I don't believe in tracking them everywhere they go and reading everything they write. But in the beginning, with a girl, you should ask her and a boy, you should ask them to share with you some of their text and then talk over some of the social dynamics that might be happening. You have to do this in a very, very non-judgmental way. And you have to overlook the cursing. There's going to be cursing. I mean, that's just all there is to it. And if you get hung up on the cursing, you're not going to be able to help with the judgment part that they need. The phone is the biggest leap in judgment, in my opinion, until you drive. and it takes a lot of parenting, and it's okay to do it in stages. It's okay to start without Wi-Fi.
Yeah, it's good. It's so tricky with the phones these days, and we have a couple of parents who live in New York City, so their kids actually, for safety, need phones because of public transportation. But I like that you're doing stages, is good. And also, like, I love what you said about don't worry about the cursing. Honestly, when your kids are approaching teenhood and stuff, we can't be afraid of words.
Right.
We have to stick with relationship. We have to try to hear. I believe this.
Yeah, me too.
I don't think it's a reflection of your values per se. The words are a reflection of a lack of communication skills, or just a developmental phase. So yes, we need boundaries. That's a bigger conversation. But if that's in the way of this bigger, more important issue of maintaining communication around phone use and potentially all the implications of having a phone, I'd support that idea to put that aside for now, and keep focused on what is your goal, what is important, what is necessary. I know we're almost out of time. Can you address medication? Do you want to address medication at all? Do you
So
recommend short acting versus long time for learning? And what do you think about breaks in medication on weekends and holidays? My concerns are related to impulse control and executive functioning, but also my son's low weight and height.
So I will tell you that historically, when I was a play therapist, I didn't want any child to be medicated. But now that I have some miles under my belt, I can tell you that medication is absolutely life-changing, and I'm a big supporter of it. Um, I think that the appropriate amount of medication can make a huge difference in a child's life. I think when it has to do with a child's weight, that you have to work very, very closely with your doctor. I mean, the last time I checked, over 55 different medications were approved by the FDA for the use of ADHD. And so find a doctor that you can work with, who you can go back and forth with and back and forth with. I mean, it's called practicing medicine, because you have to sometimes practice what is the best way to do it. And you have to be a dog with a bone sometimes as a mom, of saying, I'm still worried about his weight, or what have you. And there are other things they can do. Sometimes there's a medication they can give you to gain weight. Sometimes they can subscribe some supplements that are helpful. Dr. Russell Barkley recommends that you take the medicine on the weekends and during the summer for two reasons. One is it gets them in the habit of doing it daily without thinking about it, which is what you're going to want them to do when they're driving. The number one killer for ADHD kids is car accidents. So and that was one thing we were super strict about in our family, is if you drive, you have to be on your medicine. You don't have to be on your medicine, but you also can choose. That means you're choosing not to drive. And then the other reason is that they're building executive function skills 7 days a week, even when it looks like they're not. And whenever you take away the medication, you reduce their ability to develop those skills by about 50%. So those are the two reasons that people recommend doing it 7 days a week. I will tell you that all adolescents go through a period of time where they stop taking their medicine and start fighting you on it more and more. I think it's more of an individuation thing. And what you want to do is you want to use it as a bridge into them really owning the diagnosis, owning what the medication will or will not do for them. It seems that psychiatrists like to give long-acting medications to children so that they don't have to take a booster at school during the day, because that can take a lot of time away from them socially. It can sometimes be a little bit embarrassing to have to always go to the nurse and get medicine. But most of my college students prefer the short-acting medicine, because it doesn't mess with their libido, it doesn't hurt their ability to eat, and it gives them enough time for focus. A good 4 to 5 hours of focus in college is all you need a day to get through a 12-hour class load. And so I teach them specifically how to use those short periods of time to get the maximum amount of work done. And then they're much more compliant with the short acting medications.
Great. Well, can you, boy, I'm wanting to have a lot more questions, but I think we might have addressed it in the interview, the amount of time of focus for a younger kid. So I want to have you could you leave us with a question that is, what would you recommend for summertime to improve attention and executive function skills? Do you have some like things we can take
Yes.
it for the summer?
The main thing for summer is please do not put your kids in a bunch of academic remediation. I mean, that burns them out so badly. I mean, it's absolutely natural to feel like you want to do that. I mean, everybody says, oh, I got to get them caught up. I got to get them caught up. But we can't really catch them up. We just have to wait until they're, ready. And so when people like say, oh, they have a bad working memory, so I'm going to make them do math facts every single day for the entire summer, there's really no purpose in that. They're still going to have a working memory problem in the fall. You might as well just let them use a tool so they can remember their math facts. Don't try to make it a memorization thing, because I have some kids on my caseload who spent every summer in reading and math supplementation, and they're so burned out by the time they graduate from high school, they don't want to go to college. So even with my college students, I tell them it's okay to take 2 classes in summer session 1 while you're still in work mode, but make sure you take that second summer session off so that you have 6 weeks off school so you can go back replenished. And so the main thing that you want to do for your student in the summer is to give them downtime from rigorous academics and expose them to tons of things that show that learning is fun. Interactive museum experiences, reading together as a family, watching a movie series and talking about it together, starting crazy big art projects, and let it be an ongoing thing, things where that they can really experience learning as fun. Because the thing that students have to do who have ADHD is they have to disengage from the achievement. They're not probably going to be valedictorian. And so they need to disengage from the achievement and engage solidly with the fun and the learning. And to say to themselves when they're old enough, which usually isn't till late high school, early college, you know what, I got a C on this, but I learned so much, or I got a B on this, but I got an A++ worth of material out of this I'll be able to use in the future. And so when they can disengage from the achievement to accurately analyze their own learning, you're going to have a kid who's going to enjoy learning, who's going to get a lot out of it, and who's going to be able to have a successful college experience.
Wow. That sounds great. I love that focus, like to love learning.
Yes.
And it sounds like to taking that emphasis off, it doesn't, so from what you just said, I'm learning that you could spend the whole summer having power struggles with your kid and compromise your relationship all summer and make them even more oppositional. And in the fall, when they start school again, virtual or in person, they will not have improved their skills in their brain, but they will have negatively affected their desire to learn.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Powerful, Tina. That's
good listening.
That's also against a lot of the voices you might hear. And
yeah. I mean, people don't like when I say that because they feel a lot of my recommendations are what not to do instead of being able to do something practical, So, and people really, really want to fix ADHD kids. But the more we're in fix-it mode, the more they feel like they need to be fixed and there's something really badly wrong with them.
And I feel like it is pretty practical to like join in interesting learning. Even before school, one of my dads was like, well, we didn't have school, so we just did learning of what she was interested in, and we
Oh,
looked things up, and it was so
beautiful.
fun. And then school started, and now I'm having resistance.
Yeah.
So
And,
have fun learning with your kid this summer.
and when there's resistance around doing what the school wants, tell them to just do it as quickly and as efficiently as they can, and then they can spend more time learning what they want to learn.
Hmm. Well, Tina, this has been so great. I've been keeping up with the chat, I think. And if anyone has any final words that they want to chat into the chat, that would be awesome. And then I'm going to end the recording now.